My name is Carrie Sweeney. I'm here with Camille Coué, and we're from the Retirement Center. And we're here with Professor Richard Walker, and we're partnering today with Front Porch, our friends who operate St. Paul's Towers and SF Towers and other retirement communities around the Bay Area and beyond. And we're happy to partner today with them on the UC Retiree Learning Series, which is an effort to expand learning opportunities to retirees, as well as raise conversations about long-term care planning. But today's talk is on hiding in plain sight, the New Deal legacy in the Bay Area. Professor Richard Walker is an Emeritus of Geography at UC Berkeley and Director of the Living New Deal Project. Another example of what we call failing in retirement, and that is remaining active and engaged in really interesting projects. Dr. Walker is joining us again to share his work. He's been with us before with the New Deal's legacy of public works and art, which is all around us in the Bay Area and still very much in use. He'll share a visual survey of some of the important New Deal sites around the region and some more obscure ones as well. And I did want to say that we're looking forward to his colleague, Gray Brecken, who will be not only giving a lecture later in April, but also giving a tour of the Rincon building in San Francisco, the mural that's there. So keep an eye out in the Center Express for that information. I'm going to hand it over to Professor Walker now.
Right. Thank you, Carrie. Now, I don't see wait a second. I don't see myself. I see you. There I am. I don't know. It's disconcerting if I don't see myself. I don't exist. So hello, everyone. I'm very happy to be here, especially my retired friends and my friends at St. Paul's Towers. Sorry, I can't be live today. It'll be nice if we can ever get back to that. I always enjoyed speaking there on various topics in the past. So today I'm going to talk about the New Deal in the Bay Area, which I call hiding in plain sight. And I'm going to start out with giving you a little, whoopsie, little idea. There we go. There's my outline. Let's see, I got to close that. Okay, so I can see things. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about the New Deal, then about the Living New Deal, the project I direct. Then I'm going to talk about the New Deal in the Bay Area, except that I'll qualify that when I get there because, well, I'll qualify it now. It turned out as I was preparing my slides that there's so many New Deal sites in the Bay Area that I was overwhelmed. So I just did the East Bay. So I have an apology slide for people in San Francisco. We could do the West Bay another time. There's at least 250 New Deal sites just in San Francisco. They're all over Mount Tam and so on. So I just had to restrict myself. The good thing about that is to show you all a point, kind of prove a point I'm trying to make, which is the New Deal is everywhere. The New Deal legacy is everywhere. It's still there. And we're still documenting it because it's still living, as we put it. And then at the very end, I'll just a few concluding remarks about how you might get involved if you want to, because this is a crowdsourcing project and it's a lot of fun. Okay, so onward and upward.
You want to show the video?
No, not yet. No. Okay. The New Deal, as many of you will know, because we're all of a certain age, the New Deal was the administration of Franklin Roosevelt from 33 to 42. At that point, the war takes over. WPA lasts till 43, and so does PWA, but essentially it's over by the end of 42. The New Deal had a group of wonderful people who led different agencies, were spokespeople, and so on, including, of course, Eleanor Roosevelt, who didn't have any official position other than being First Lady, but was a hugely influential figure at the time. But people like Harold Ickes and Frances Perkins, the first woman in the cabinet, in a presidential cabinet, Harry Hopkins, the mover and shaker behind WPA and so on, and people like Senator Robert Wagner, people in Congress. There were some wonderful people in Congress who were instrumental to getting many of the New Deal laws and so on. Hold on, I'm going to see. Interesting. Okay, so the policies of the New Deal crossed the gamut from financial reform, which was mostly what they did at the very beginning to get the financial system back on its feet after it had collapsed in the Great Depression that had been descending from 1929 right down to the moment that Roosevelt took office in March of 33. That most people don't remember that well, but it was hugely important in terms of reorganizing the banks, Securities and Exchange Commission, taking the dollar off of the gold standard, and so on. They also did a National Recovery Act right in the first year, which was not very successful. They were experimenting, and one of the things about the New Deal is experimentation. But some of the policies that people remember best are Social Security, passed in 1935, labor law reform in 1935, things like mortgage insurance, federal mortgage insurance passed in 1934, the agricultural adjustment, which farm support system passed in 1933 and then passed again in 1937. Public housing, major effort at public housing in both under the PWA and later in 1936, and so on and so on. We have on our website summaries of New Deal policies and programs that now number, I think, 6 dozen. So while many people remember Social Security and maybe labor law reform and a couple other programs, but they have no idea. Almost no one, unless you're a historian, remembers how much was done, how unbelievably active on so many fronts the New Deal was. It's kind of astounding in 10 years how much they did, how much they tried to do to deal with all the different dimensions of the American economy, which of course had collapsed in the Great Depression. And I'm not going to go through that part of the story, which is really interesting, because I want to focus on basically relief programs and public works. So one of the great things about the New Deal is that they came to the aid of the working class, the working people en masse who were suffering horribly with unemployment rate of at least 25%, and wages collapsed. You had mass unemployment and hunger, destitution and hunger, because there was no unemployment insurance. That came with Social Security. There was nothing but kind of charity and some very poor state programs and local programs. They were extremely tight-fisted. And Harry Hopkins came in with what was called federal emergency relief and broke that open and started pushing relief out to millions of destitute Americans, working Americans, and then also programs that were called work relief. And that started with things like the Civilian Conservation Corps right away, the Civil Works Administration in the winter of 33, 34, and then of course, finally the Works Progress Administration, WPA, run by Hopkins, which is the best, probably the best known. It and CCC are probably the best known of all the relief programs that I'll be talking about. But what I'm particularly focused on, because the Living New Deal is focused on, is public works. So what do we mean? Okay, there we go. What do we mean by public works? We mean everything that's for public use. And we've sort of forgotten that a government does all these things at every level, local, state, national. The government is building and servicing the country constantly. Well, under the New Deal, it was doing this at a degree and a variety that it's almost hard to imagine. So anything that was for public use and some that was kind of semi-private. For instance, they financed the new locomotives, diesel locomotives, to revolutionize the railroads at the time. And those ran on private railroad lines. So civic buildings are a really important category. Things like courthouses, auditoriums, and so on. Schools, of course, massive number of schools. Post offices, very well known. They were built all over at the time. What we might call today infrastructure, the kind of nitty gritty roads, bridges, tunnels. Now it would be internet lines. And then it was electricity, getting electricity to everybody in the country. And sewers, waterworks, dams, of course, very famously big dams like Hoover Dam, Shasta Dam, and so on were New Deal projects. Parks and recreation, playgrounds, campgrounds, athletic fields of all kinds are all over. Recreation halls and more, trails. I'll get into some of that as we go. Conservation. The New Deal was a major period of conservation efforts. People often forget that. This was the creation of the Soil Conservation Service in the middle of the Dust Bowl. The CCC alone planted 9 billion trees. WPA planted trees all over on streets. The CCC did things like fire towers, fire breaks, and then wildlife refuges. I think Roosevelt added at least 100 new wildlife refuges. And of course, national parks, national forests were expanded and so on. And then famously artworks, and everybody loves New Deal artworks, murals, bas-reliefs on buildings, sculptures and statues, independent paintings, drawings, prints, all kinds of artworks by the tens of thousands. And then they had a whole group of what we don't actually document, but are service projects, things like teaching and sewing rooms, school lunch programs, things like food stamps and school lunch programs were first started under the New Deal. Library work to help recatalog, support librarians, archaeological works. It's just incredible, the variety of what they did. And I need to emphasize that this was not just short-term Great Depression recovery acts, though they were that. These were government investment. And they meant these things, most of these projects, the material infrastructure to last for a long time. And it has, which is why we still have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of these public works are still operating around the country. And something that people don't realize, but Joe Biden's been talking about it today, is things about modernization, technological improvements in production, something like the modern locomotives they built, or they financed more modern naval vessels and merchant marine vessels. They extended with the Rural Electrification Administration, getting electricity out to rural areas that had never had it. Of course, building dams, which at that time was the revolutionary technology in that area. So modernization, the whole country was basically brought into the 20th century. The backward parts of the country were brought into the 20th century for the first time, in the same way that what Biden is trying to do today is bring the whole country into the 21st century with things like universal high-grade internet. You can see from the figures I give you there that the WPA, what the WPA alone did is just amazing. Okay, where are New Deal public works? They are everywhere. They were in every state. They were in all 3,000 and more counties. They're in every city and in almost every town. That is, any town that's above a kind of hamlet has something from the New Deal. Usually it's a civil works like a school or a library, an auditorium, something like that. And it's amazing as you drive around the US and go to rural areas, especially where things haven't changed much since the 1930s. often the nicest, one of the two nicest buildings in town is still something like a New Deal auditorium or City Hall or courthouse. And any national park or state park that existed at the time had New Deal works, massive New Deal improvements for recreation. I threw in Hawaii and Puerto Rico here because those were territories, of course, Puerto Rico still is, of the US, and they did things in the Virgin Islands, in Guam, in Alaska, which was still not a state, Hawaii, American Samoa, and so on. It's quite amazing, the reach. They even helped build a highway to Alaska across Canada, things like that. The nomenclature of the New Deal can be very confusing, and I'm going to throw out a lot of names, which I'm not going to try and unconfuse you too much because this would take forever. But some of the agencies that you've probably heard of or may have heard of are the funding agencies like Public Works Administration, PWA, or the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which simply finance the works of the debt, and the works directly works along with the states. They would get the states and the localities to pitch in too, so that they would have buy-in. The relief agencies, or relief work agencies, were Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, some brief ones before they finally hit on the WPA, which lasted from 35 to 43. The National Youth Administration for Students, which was a branch of WPA. And of course, the Federal Arts Project, which I forgot to list here, which was under WPA. There were some other arts programs, but Federal Arts Program was the most famous one, with the theater, painting, music, writing, and so on. Photography was under the FSA. So it was hugely complex. And then there's single purpose agencies that are very famous, like the Soil Conservation Service, SCS, or the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, the Housing Administration, and so on. There was also, of course, the line agencies like the Post Office Department and the Treasury, the Bureau of Public Roads, the Bureau of Reclamation. They were doing massive construction around the country as well, because the New Deal was spending a lot and they were getting more funding than they'd had before. Who did the work? I think an important part of the New Deal to remember is that everyone, they hired millions of Americans. The relief agencies hired for work projects roughly 15 million people, which was about the same number that at the peak of the Great Depression in beginning of 33, there were about 15 million out of 60 million people unemployed, 60 million in the workforce. That's how many they ended up employing over the just brief 10 years. They also, of course, paid for private contractors to build dams, bridges, roads. Those were private companies. So private construction companies also hired probably an equivalent number of people. Certainly, I think the number estimate, PWA estimated something like 8 million people paid through their work. These were skilled workers, unskilled workers, all workers of all kinds, men and women, young and old, black and white, brown, and so on. So it was everybody. I'm not going to say more about this, but there are some very serious misunderstandings, like that African Americans were excluded from the New Deal. That is simply not true. They were employed literally by the million, by the CCC, WPA, and so on. Okay, Living New Deal, what we're doing is trying to map the New Deal across America. We are trying to educate Americans, what I'm doing today, trying to show people what the New Deal did so they would realize how important, what a turning point it was in American history. And they will appreciate that it would provide many lessons for today. I took a note there because I realized as I talk things that I left out of my talk and on my slides. It's always shocking when you work on these things for hours and then you go, wait, why didn't I say that? Okay, what we feel we're doing is Gray Brecken came up with this phrase that we're unearthing a lost civilization. And what I show you in those pictures are one of the, I think it's Tikal and the Mayan Peninsula, the Mayan civilizations, where we saw people could see pretty clearly there were some of these old monumental structures still standing, but the rest was just forest. But if you get LIDAR, or they use lasers now, you can see that there were entire cities that have been covered by the forest. And that's actually what it's like with the New Deal. There are entire cities of projects that I never see, never saw, never realized they're there, and they're still there, let alone the things that, of course, have actually disappeared. Well, the public works of the New Deal were never documented. The war hit, the agencies were dissolved, they did fairly perfunctory final reports, if they did anything at all. Most of that is is in the National Archive, or in many cases lost, like many artworks were just given away or stuck in a museum basement and later lost and people just don't even realize they're there, or they were sold off or whatever. So we're the first to do this. So that gives us a kind of basic raison d'etre, which is mapping New Deal public works. We've got, you can see where we started in the upper right. We did California first and then started going national back in 2010, 11. And you can see how few sites we had. By 2015, we had about, I'd say about 5,000 to 10,000 sites. And now we have over 17, pushing 18,000 sites. We changed our map. You can see we have 3 different map platforms there. We keep having to change it. The one on the left there with all the red dots looks, like it's busier, but the one on the right, the lower right, I can assure you has many more dots. That's a more contemporary screenshot of our map, which you can find at livingnewdeal.org on your laptop or your phone. Okay, we do a lot of outreach like I'm doing now, talks, tours like Gray Brecken is going to do for you. That's Gray at the Rincon Annex on the upper right there. We've done art exhibits, informational exhibits. That's one in New York on the lower right at the Roosevelt houses. Below is a conference we did on women in the New Deal back in 2017, which unfortunately we haven't been able to do again, something like that because of COVID. But we switched to webinars, and we do webinars 6, 8, 10 times a year now. So you can find those, you can participate, they're open to everybody. And we do a lot of other things like educational aid. Students and teachers are our #1 users, and therefore we are trying to improve our educational aids for them. Most of our information, besides our outreach, people talking and so on, writing articles, doing newspaper interviews, one I'm going to show you in a second, is our website. Our website gets a lot of visitation. We're up to about 3 million visits a year, which is a lot for a little nonprofit like us. And it's just packed with information. And it's so packed with news and maps of various kinds, media like videos, historic films, videos of people talking like me today. There'll be a link on our website. And educational materials, bibliographies, whatever we can do, our events, that's all on the website. And it's so packed with materials that a lot of people find it hard to navigate. So we have completely redesigned it, and should be available within a month or so, after a couple of years of work, a whole new layout of our website that's going to be much easier to navigate because it's all picture driven. The last thing we do as a mission for the Living New Deal is to trumpet the policy lessons of the New Deal. So I've just done a quick summary here. This is not a lecture on that, so I don't want to overdo it. But it did, contrary to popular opinion, what recovered the country from the Great Depression was not World War II, but the New Deal, and I can prove it. The New Deal brought the country the rest of the country, the half that had been left behind from Appalachia to rural, the Mountain West, brought it into the 20th century with electricity, with civil works, with modern water and sewer, fresh water, drinking water, and so on. These things didn't exist in many places of the country at that time. It's amazing how rural and third world parts of the United States looked in the 1930s. Quite apart from, of course, talking about the Old South and Jim Crow. If you really want to be shocked, go back and read or look at, read books or look at photographs of the Jim Crow era. If you think we're bad now, which we still can be, it was just appalling. And the New Deal improved the lives of ordinary people with social insurance, social security for pensions, and a host of things like parks and recreation, school buildings and food aid, health. They built health clinics and hospitals all over the country, and so on. And of course, art, public art everywhere, public artworks by the tens of thousands. And just, you know, as a little kind of add-on, in the beginning, the Depression was so traumatic for the country that faith in American democracy was under a siege. There were lots of rallies of Nazis in Madison Square Garden. There were right-wing maniacs like Father Coughlin on the radio. So if you think talk radio is crazy today, it was just as crazy in the 1930s. There was a fascist movement, America First, of the rich, led by people like Henry Ford. So it was really a mess. And what Roosevelt did was restore faith that the government worked for the people, was rebuilding the economy for business, I have to say. You may agree or disagree with that idea, but that's what it did. And so business, an awful lot of the business class was all for it for a while. And of course, the public was massively for it, and Roosevelt was reelected 3 times. So the New Deal transformed the nation, and it transformed every place, every city, and we'll see that in the Bay Area. Now, what I wanted to do is I want to give you a brief survey in photos of some of what the New Deal did in and around the Bay Area. Oh my gosh, I am so sorry I didn't turn off my phone. What a classic error. So I just threw in here some pictures, a Rincon Annex mural on the upper right, the Maritime Museum, which is the old San Francisco Aquatic Park, which also has magnificent murals. On the left corner there, you see the Coit Tower murals, which have to be seen to be believed. They've been cleaned up. They're magnificent. One of our people on the Living New Deal, Harvey Smith, helped do the signage there. There's the beach chalet, that wonderful carving of an octopus in the middle, and also magnificent murals by Frederick LeBeau. And then in Golden Gate Park, it's just full of New Deal stuff. There's George Washington High School. There's schools all over San Francisco. And then if we were to go to Mount Tamalpais, from Muir Woods to the Water District lands, the CCC WPA, we're all over Mount Tamalpais and Marin, building things like the amphitheater. So, but I'm not going to talk about that. So what I would like to do, though, is we had our moment in the sun this fall, which some of you may have seen, but I think many of you did not, which was we were featured on the cultural report of Jeffrey Brown on the PBS NewsHour. And it's only 6 minutes long, so I would like to show it to you now. So Carrie, do you want to run that video? Carrie? Well?
Hi, sorry, yes, let me get the video started for you. Hold on 1 second.
All right.
I think that would be Camille at this point.
Oh, Camille, are you We'll run it. Okay. That's right. Carrie's gone now. Carrie had to bow out.
Can you all hear the video okay?
I don't hear a thing.
Yeah, it's not on yet. Camille, maybe you need to share your screen.
Yep, I am sharing my screen. Let's see, hold shift. Can you see my screen now?
We don't. Look, Camille,
Okay.
it's not that important.
Okay, we can send the link out later.
Yeah, you know, everybody, if you go to the livingnewdeal.org website, the first thing that'll happen is that this video will pop up. And you can just click on play and watch the whole thing. It's pretty nice. They did a really beautiful job. Unfortunately, you'll have to listen to me a little more. The gray is very good. And you'll see some very nice pictures of New Deal sites around the Bay. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead with my talk. I was afraid this might happen, and you know, it's the way it goes. Such is life. Okay, so I will now go ahead. There we go. So I am going to I'm going to start on the Bay. And I'm going to have several categories. I'm going to show you these photos so that I can, and which I will point out to everyone. And I hope they're large enough that you can see them pretty clearly. I thought about trying to do a slide for every one or two, but that gets just too much. So just on the Bay itself, and even on our side of the Bay, in plain sight, hiding in plain sight, are New Deal projects. The Bay Bridge is the most famous. The Bay Bridge was paid for by the PWA. And also probably some, no, I don't know if it had bond money from the RFC, that it may have. The Golden Gate Bridge was not, but the Bay Bridge was. And in that little insert I put there, you can see our piece of the old Bay Bridge on our side, which goes up to Yerba Buena Island, and the old cantilever section, which has now been torn down and replaced by a very beautiful new tower and kind of causeway. But the suspension bridge side going from Yerba Buena to San Francisco is still very much there and still very beautiful. So that's one. Treasure Island. The entirety of Treasure Island was created by the New Deal. The WPA, I don't know if upper left, you can see there's that beautiful curved building, which I will come back to. In the middle on the left, it's kind of a little hidden. I probably didn't do that right. You can see a lot of rubble and then the bridge in the background and Yerba Buena Island. Okay, the WPA built the entire wall around what was to be Treasure Island and then filled it with muck from the bottom of the bay. I think there were some other participants in that project and built Treasure Island, aptly named for the 1939 World's Fair. And that World's Fair, they built several buildings that served the World's Fair. There were a lot more temporary buildings that were torn down right away, as was done in those days. But the curved building there was used as an exhibit hall, and I think the main exhibit hall. But it was then going to be used as the airport terminal for an San Francisco airport on Treasure Island. And the idea was that they were going to bring seaplanes in, because in the Pacific at that time, because it was very long hops and planes could not go that far yet, propeller planes, they used a lot of seaplanes. And those were supposedly going to land in the bay. Now I am getting someone else talking, I hope. Well,
Yeah, I muted them, so I think we should be.
okay, we're okay. All right. So that plan, however, was abandoned when the Navy took over Treasure Island for the next 50 years for the war and thereafter. But that is now a museum. Then we have, if you go down to the bottom left, you'll see the original terminal building at the original Oakland Airport, and then in the middle, a hangar number 7, which were built with New Deal funds and by the WPA and the Civil Works Administration. They rebuilt, they paved, and rebuilt, extended the landing strips there, which of course are now a small side airport to the main Oakland International, but it's all still there. At the lower right corner is Franklin Roosevelt's presidential yacht, the USS Potomac, which is anchored at Jack London Square Airport of Oakland. You can go and visit it. It's really quite fun. On the upper right, I have Berkeley Aquatic Park, which was built. They built the East Bay Shore access road they built all the access roads to the Bay Bridge, some of which are still there, were also financed with the help of the PWA and the Bureau of Public Roads. And then where the freeway is now, Highway 80, was first East Shore Highway. That was put in as part of that project. And then behind it, the WPA built the Berkeley Aquatic Park, which is this mile-long tidal basin with a number of buildings that are still there, they were originally meant to be boathouses and so on. Very nice park. Even some of the original trees are still there, and it's a great place to go look at birds. And you can see in the middle there, a black and white, that was also built by the New Deal. I think it was WPA, if I don't have that wrong, was the original breakwaters for the Berkeley Yacht Harbor. And of course, that has totally changed because later on it was used as a garbage dump, and they built a more elaborate marinas and so on and so forth. But the beginning of that was in the New Deal. So that's just on the bay. If I can just get, okay, there we go. Civic buildings are all over the East Bay. The most famous or the most noticeable is probably the Alameda Courthouse, that beautiful courthouse, Alameda County Courthouse in Oakland, downtown Oakland. Glorious Art Moderne or Art Deco building. Several post offices here, there, and everywhere. The one in Richmond has been saved. It was going to be demolished. The interior was gutted, unfortunately, but the front is beautiful. The post office on the upper right there is in, now I'm going to blank on it. Oh my God. That one, I cannot remember where it is. Okay, maybe it'll come to me. In the center on the right is the old FSA building and bank, the Federal Home Loan Bank building, or no, Federal Farm Loan Bank building, which is now Berkeley City Hall. In the lower right, you see out in Martinez. Martinez has several very nice New Deal buildings. One is the courthouse, the middle courthouse. There are 3 courthouses out there, a very old one, a new one, and the middle one is New Deal. In the center and the bottom, San Leandro City Hall, that was paid for by the Public Works Administration. And in the lower left, you have the North Berkeley Library, and that was also financed with New Deal money. And I cannot believe it. That's not the Pittsburgh post office in the upper right. Well, I'm quite ashamed of myself here.
Someone, BK says it is the Martinez post office.
Oh, it is the Martinez post office. You're quite right. Okay. So after I hailed Martinez. Well, Martinez is a county seat of Contra Costa, so it got a number of buildings. Okay, schools around the East Bay. Okay, most famously, Berkeley High School, the main auditorium building is PWA financed. The H and the G buildings run along the side on Martin Luther King Road are PWA financed. There's also artworks that I'll come back to there. The auditorium wasn't finished, and it was put on pause by World War II and finished after the war, but it was still a New Deal building. Fremont High School in Oakland was New Deal. The only part of it that hasn't been rebuilt is that auditorium gymnasium building that you see in the middle. Upper right, beautiful Roosevelt Middle School in Oakland is New Deal. I'm pretty sure McClymonds High School is New Deal, but I have yet to prove that. I only realized that it was built during the New Deal, so it must be, but I have to find proof of it. They gave Piedmont a lot of money. Piedmont got money for the high school buildings, for the Frederick Havens Elementary School, which has now been completely replaced except for an auditorium. But the Egbert Beach School is still there on that border of Piedmont and Oakland. The Wildwood School is still there. And there in the Chabot School, they built an auditorium for the Chabot Elementary School and several more. But that's just basically Oakland and Berkeley. And I didn't even try to go out to Martinez and other places. The parks, the work they did in the parks is amazing around here. So basically all our older parks are completely the product of development by the New Deal. So Mount Diablo, that beautiful tower at the top, little museum now is CCC. CCC built something like 24 campgrounds, that many trails, picnic areas, improved the road up Mount Diablo, and so on and so forth. And they built outhouses, picnic areas like in the lower left, that's from Mount Diablo. They would build these characteristic stone stoves and concrete picnic tables under the trees there. Temescal Park, which the original East Bay Parks had just been purchased in 1930-31, I guess. That's what's now Tilden, Redwood Park, Sibley Park, Temescal Park, and there's one last. It was part of the old Redwood Park. Those were all completely redone by CCC and WPA. The golf course at Tilden, for example, is a WPA works. The Brazilian room was moved there with the help of the New Deal. The botanical garden in Tilden Park was massively improved with stone walls that you see in the upper right with help from the WPA. WPA built Wildcat Canyon Road all the way from Marinda up to Berkeley through the park. They built trails in the park. That's one trail road built by the CCC in the mid right, and in the lower right, you'll see a restroom. They built beautiful stone restrooms, many of which are still in use. And in the upper left, Temescal Park, they put in the beach there and this magnificent beach house and a wonderful waterfall and stream, artificial stream and waterfall that are still running to this day. They built the beach at Lake Anza and a beach house there that has been replaced, unfortunately, because it was quite a handsome old beach house, and all kinds of drinking fountains and waterworks and so on that I'll come back to. So the East Bay Parks, the original East Bay Parks and Mount Diablo State Park are completely redone for public recreation. City parks all over were redone. In the upper left there, you'll see the magnificent Woodminster Amphitheater still in use. Below it, there's this unbelievable cascade. It starts with these pools you see just the edge of. That doesn't run anymore because the pump needs to be replaced. I have seen it running when they just did it with city water as a kind of demonstration for us. But it's that cascade is unbelievable. On the lower left there, you can see the stairs going up to the fountain, which was running that day. This picture was taken. I think it looks like the cascade was running that day. It's in pretty mediocre shape because City of Oakland never has enough money for its parks. It's up there in Woodminster is in what's his name? Oh, our great Joaquin Miller Park. Sorry, I'm losing it, you know, those brain cells. Then the upper middle, you'll see the Oakland Amphitheater of Roses, or the Rose Garden, as most people call it, which was massively improved, not by the WPA, as the sign says there, but actually by the Emergency Recovery Administration, with federal monies that went through the state. And those workers worked in 33, 34, and early 35 on the Morecambe Amphitheater of Roses, that beautiful cascade, which still works. Just below it is Davy Tennis, this incredible tennis park and a quarry with that beautiful little kind of hut and recreational. That's a New Deal WPA project. Below that is Oakland's Lake Chapeau Golf Course. Then there's Diamond Park, if you move to the right where those benches are, the little Francis Marion Smith Park, then the Berkeley Rose Garden, the gem of Berkeley parks, and the tennis courts were both WPA, CWA. My personal favorite is Montclair Park because I live near it and walk through it all the time. That's in the upper right. And then if you've never been to Alvarado Park, which is now part of the East Bay Parks, but was a city park originally in Richmond, it is full of the most amazing stonework. So you should try to go there. We have all kinds of roads and bridges. The original Caldecott Tunnel, which is there in the middle, the one on the right, the one when you're going outward to the outer East Bay, that was built with a lot of money from the PWA, Bureau of Public Roads, as well as California Highway Department and so on. On the upper left, you'll see Skyline Drive. That was built to link together all the New Deal, the East Bay Parks up on the ridge. That was WPA. The beautiful cantilever or lift bridges, I'm not sure if you call them cantilever, but they're in that style. Across the Oakland estuary, there are two of them, High Street and Park Street. Those are PWA financed. The access road to the Caldecott Tunnel, which is there in the bottom, a lot of that was financed with PWA money. And then, of course, streets all over, which is very hard to document individual ones, but improvements to access roads like Park Boulevard and so on, but it's all over Oakland. They did hundreds of thousands of dollars of funds. Notice you'll see in that newspaper, it says WPA allotments and Oakland Treasury cash. That Treasury cash is probably means Bureau of Public Roads or PWA. So that's all over. And then I don't want to forget artworks because people love New Deal artworks. Just in the East Bay. Now, the ones in San Francisco are the most famous ones, Coit Tower, Rincon Annex, and Maritime Museum, and so on, but we have a nice selection. The sculpture in the upper left, you see a sculpture on the Woodminster Amphitheater. Very beautiful sculptures there. Lower left, there are two gigantic mosaic sculptures in the Alameda Courthouse, but they're in the old entrance lobby where nobody enters anymore for safety reasons, I guess. And it's really sad, but you can kind of make your way through there if you're ever in the courthouse. The lower center, that is by, I'm going to forget his name, very famous Bay Area artist. That's out in the Martinez Post Office. And in the lower right are some of the bas-reliefs on Berkeley High School, which are magnificent, though they have a lot of trees in front of them now. In the upper right, you have the mural by Suzanne Scheuer in the Berkeley Post Office, which was going to be privatized but saved. There's a couple of mosaics on the old little bitty art museum on the Berkeley campus. Berkeley campus didn't get a lot of New Deal. A lot of colleges did, but not the Berkeley campus. And then on the in the middle there is an old wood carving by Sergeant Johnson, one of the most famous African-American artists of the time. That was done for the old deaf and blind school that is now the Clark Kerr campus of UC Berkeley. And it was put in storage when they redid that campus. And then the people who run the storage sold it for peanuts on an auction to an antiques dealer who knew what he was looking at, and they didn't. And it ended up being bought for something like $1 million by the Hunting Museum in Southern California, which now has it on exhibit. So a really black eye for UC Berkeley and its handling of its valuables. Finally, hidden and humble works, sidewalks everywhere, gutters, driveways done by the WPA, you see in the upper left. A lot of the New Deal works are simply not marked. I got a picture in the upper middle there of a little tiny brass plaque at Montclair Park with these amazing stone walls running all over. That's the only thing that marks it as WPA. On the upper right, culverts and roads all over the place, county roads and so on. Also at Montclair Park, very popular courts that are now being used for, what is the name of that game? Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. The game that everybody loves right now to play was rebuilt. Pardon me?
Are you talking about pickleball now?
Pickleball, thank you. Pickleball courts were actually built about 2 years ago into the old decayed tennis court, which has built by the WPA along with the park. It has beautiful stone seating if you want to go watch pickleball. In the middle center there is Summit Reservoir in Berkeley that you never really notice. You go by it. That's when it was first being built, part of the East Bay mud reservoir system. There's a hydrant up in Tilden Park. They redid the whole water system there, is New Deal. And trails all over. That's a sign for trails over in Redwood Park. All those trails were done by the CCC. All right, I need to wrap this up as I'm ambling on. I just want to encourage you to go and look at our website, look at our map, use our map. It's a lot of fun to poke around on it, to find yourself if you're traveling or you're at home, or to tell people you know who are going on road trips. As I do with my partner, Joan, we go all over and we find New Deal sites everywhere. And you can look at this on your phone while you're traveling. You can do it on your laptop at home and so on. It's very easy to use. You just go to livingnewdeal.org. You can Google Living New Deal and it'll come up immediately. You don't have to even remember that URL, that address. And then you can do all kinds of searches on the map. You can do filters, find only artworks or CCC works or whatever you want. You can geolocate yourself. So all you do is you punch that little, I don't know if you can see it, there's a little blue button on that map, those maps in the upper right-hand corner, and you just poke it and it'll zoom in right to where you are. And then if you look at those icons, which are color-coded by, is it rec, parks, is it education, what is it? You click on a button and up comes that little panel. And then if you want more information, you click on full project info and up comes a site information page that you can look at. And these are a couple of examples of what you'll see. They'll have many photographs, they'll have information in detail, who built it, who was the architect, who paid for it, when it was built, and so on and so forth. And these things, it just makes a wonderful scavenger hunt. I really enjoy this. I think a lot of people don't realize how fun this can be. Just everywhere you go, any old national park you go to in the West is going to have New Deal sites, almost any of the classic parks, any small town you go to, all over, as you can see, all over our cities and towns of the East Bay and around the Bay Area, you'll find these things, and especially in the older town centers. You'll find the older schools, the older city halls, and so on. And you can find, you can see telltale hints. You know, Art Deco is a big giveaway, unless it's from the 20s, but it's usually often from the 30s. The kind of rustic style they built in the parks, the CCC used a lot of that. If you see beautiful stonework in parks, it's almost always New Deal by old Italian stonemason who are unemployed. Look for plaques, look for historic markers, sidewalk stamps. You will walk across all over. You will stumble upon all over the Bay Area. I found them from Santa Rosa to Albany to Martinez. And then you can actually do fun research on your own. You could Google things, or go to one of these newspaper registries, go to library sites and photographic collections. You know, the California Online Digital Library has enormous numbers of photographs of WPA workers, CCC camps, and so on. Your local historical society. So it's
Richard?
fantastic what you can do. And thank you for listening. I hope you come and visit our site. I hope you come and listen to more of our talks and enjoy our website. And if you want to volunteer, if you want to send in information, you can. We have an app for iPhones, or you can do it on our website. You can send us questions at info@livingnewdeal.org.
Richard? We
Yeah, and
have
you
some
can donate.
questions, and we're very close to the end. First of all, I want to apologize for coming in late. We had some technical difficulties, but I have a question from John. Can you talk about the individual skills learned by all of these programs? Did they have an apprenticeship program? We have such a shortage of skilled workers today.
Yes, CCC definitely did job training as part of the program, especially later in the 1930s. Both CCC, WPA, which we think of them as just unemployed manual workers digging ditches, but they always had skilled workers working along with the unskilled to show them the skills. So there was quite a lot of on-the-job training and things like laying concrete, stonework, construction, and so on. And even things as simple as trail building, you have to know what you're doing. And they would have experienced workers. So there was that for sure. And of course, a lot of skilled workers were hired through the PWA projects, but how much apprenticeship they did on that, I couldn't tell you. Oh, I can tell you, like National Youth Administration did a lot of training of library work, archaeological work. Those were all took young people and students and put them to work and had them trained. They weren't just, they didn't just get put to work without somebody giving them direction and developing skills.
Mary Lee said I had, actually, Elizabeth Byrne. Is there an index or list of artists who did New Deal work in the Bay Area or East Bay? Would that be on the website?
No, it's not. What you can do on the website is this. You can do a search by the artist's name. Just a kind of ordinary keyword search, and you will get a list of any mention of that artist on any site and so on. There is an advanced search where you can go in and enter the artist's name, and it'll tell you every site across the United States where that artist worked. Now, of course, that's limited by the fact we have 17,600 sites, and there are many, many, many more that those artists would have worked. we have just started this year. We hired a new person, Mary Oken, to lead an art. She's an art historian. She's going to lead an art initiative. And what we want to do is pull together all the information sources on New Deal art that are available around the country, so that you could really do systematic searches much more easily. Because right now, the problem with so much of the New Deal information is it's scattered. And we're working on trying to do the same just for things like, where do you go to find out about CCC works or WPA works? And it's so scattered. So at least we can do is provide some aids, research aids for people who are searching for their favorite artist or not, beyond Google, doing Google searches, which of course you can always try. A lot of our sites come up when you do Google searches.
Marilee asked, have you ever pitched to GOP or MAGA groups?
Not that I know
And then
I wish.
Ken is,
of. I wish, but they don't invite me.
yeah. Ken asks, I'm curious of what the cost of all these projects would be if converted in today's dollars. Has there ever been any research?
There are efforts to add up New Deal programs, and depends on how you do it. It adds up, how it actually adds up. I think in 1940 dollars, it added up to something like 40 billion. But in current dollars, of course, that would be something, I think, upwards of a trillion at least, or a couple trillion. But in fact, the best way I think to do it is compare it to the GDP at the time. And if you took, for instance, Biden's proposal for a $4 or $5 trillion Build Back Better Act, the New Deal would have been proportionate to our GDP today, that is to the total economy, would have been about 10 times bigger than that. So about 40 trillion in today's dollars.
Angelique asks, or says, in 1961, I worked at a Foster's restaurant in San Francisco that had some magnificent murals done at the time of the WPA. Do you know where they are now?
No, I don't. And this is a problem because a lot of them have disappeared. They got privatized. People bought them up from kind of fire sales. They're supposed to be in the public, they're public art, and they're supposed to belong to the federal government to this day, to the public. But a lot of them were hastily either given away or sold off or stowed with museums, libraries. For example, a librarian at the Berkeley Public Library about 10 years ago was doing some work in their archives and came across this hoard of about 100 beautiful prints and drawings done by New Deal artists that had been hastily given to the library as it was around the country so that they would be, at least they'd be kept, because the artists didn't know what was going to happen. The WP administrators, as they were closing up shop, were just trying to put them in safekeeping. But a lot of them, nobody knows they're there. They've never been inventoried, or they get sold off. So you can go, there are several galleries. Swan Gallery in New York, for example, sells New Deal art all the time. And you wonder, well, where did that come from?
Jacqueline is asking if there was opposition in Congress at the time to these programs. We know there was. Would you like to speak a little bit?
Well, Roosevelt had the great advantage over Joe Biden of having about a 2/3 majority in both houses. The Great Depression, the Republicans had been in power in the Hoover administration right through almost to the pit of the nadir of the Great Depression. So they lost a lot of support. And so when Roosevelt comes in March 33, they used to start in March then, people were completely fed up, and they had voted a lot of Democrats in the fall of 32 into Congress. So he had a pretty healthy majority right off. And then in 34, he got an even bigger majority. That's the election they compare Biden's 22 to, except that Roosevelt increased his majorities to about 2/3 in both houses. 36, he had the greatest presidential victory until then. So he was very, very popular. However, once you started passing laws like Social Security and labor law, and even WPA, this hiring the unemployed, raising their wages in the South, for example, it started to disturb employers, disturb sort of the way things were supposed to be. It was particularly true of the South, and the South started to defect from the New Deal fairly quickly. And business started to defect as the economy recovered, because it was growing by almost 10% a year from 33 through 1942, before the war, with one exception of that horrible recession when Roosevelt did massive cutbacks to balance the budget in 37. It turned out to be a horrible mistake. And within a year, they turned it around and pumped money back in. But the economy was growing so much that a lot of business said, hey, we don't need you. A lot of farmers said, hey, we don't need you anymore. And so, and then, so the majorities went down, the right started, the conservative forces in Congress started to build up. There's whole books written upon this. And then, the ultra right, of course, never went away. They were biding their time. And to this day, you can find that they're still trying to target Social Security and any New Deal programs that are still around. That has been a kind of watchword for the right ever since the late New Deal was, we have to undo all this stuff. So they had lots of opposition, but they proceeded despite it. And fortunately, they had the majorities to maintain it. But basically, new initiatives in the New Deal, the last ones come in 38. Then Roosevelt's attention turns to the war that's brewing in Europe. And after that, an awful lot of New Deal public works are going to roads that lead to military bases, or little airports all over the country justified by the wartime sort of pre-war buildup, that sort of thing.
Richard, I have one last question, and I'm sorry that I'm not going to get to everyone. Well, actually, I have two questions. First of all, is there any way that people can submit questions to you via email or through the website?
Yes.
That you will answer directly?
Mm-hmm.
So they just go to the.
Yes, you can write me at richardwalker@livingnewdeal.org. I'll get your email.
All right, great. And the way that the New Deal actually came to fruition was through economic collapse. Do you think we're going to have to experience another economic collapse to get ourselves into the 21st century?
Well, I'm afraid to change things in this country, you need major shocks. And the Great Depression ushered in one of the 3-4 major turning points in American history, along with the Civil War, Reaganism, and neoliberalism in the 1980s, and the New Deal, progressive era. These are the major turning points in American history. So you don't get that without some pretty dramatic changes. COVID was a possibility, and I think some of the rather dramatic legislation that Biden Biden and the Democrats in the last year or two were only possible because of COVID and that kind of mini collapse. And COVID is an amazing turning point in our history. It's hard to realize while you're living it, but I think it will be looked back on as an important inflection point. And we did get quite a bit out of that, but not enough because of the politics.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Richard.